So this past week, last several weeks in fact, we've been inundated with lots of interruptions in our lives, I think. We've been interrupted with lots of tragic news and challenging news, and it comes at a time when this season already carries with itself a lot of mixed blessings, I think, mixed emotions for any number of reasons, for all of us, I suspect. But particularly with all this tragic news, these uninvited guests always seem to be knocking at our door. And some of them come in completely everyday kinds of moments, but we have a way of living our life that I think is designed to sort of keep the door closed, is designed in a way to sort of, we're too busy. We kind of keep the window up. So the other day I was driving to church, I think it was, but it was mid-afternoon, a little bit late. The sun was gone, it was cloudy, it was maybe even a little misty, and I was at the intersection of Clover Lane and the interstate, I-30, which is not too far down from Arlington Heights High School. Some of you all know where I'm talking about. It's not far from where my wife and I live. Very familiar spot. Is one of those places that we all have in our lives. We don't even think about what we're doing. We just drive to the stop sign and keep moving on to the next stop sign in order to get to our destination. And there was a fella there, and he had his hood up on his truck, and it looked like his wife was in the car, and there wasn't anybody else on the road at that moment, and I was pulling up to the stop sign, and of course he steps away from the car and waves me down. And I'm thinking it's another one of those interruptions which happen a lot, especially this time of the year, and he's kind of smiling and just beckoning me, as if begging me to stop and roll the window down. And my first inclination is I need to be somewhere. But then my second inclination is I need to just roll the window down. And so I did. I rolled the window down, and he looks at me and he says, "You know," and he has, I don't know what it was. It's a narrative, and it was $17.50 that was needed, and there was a car repair, and the wife was pregnant, and who knows what else was about to happen. And I'd lost thinking about it. The narrative just kind of went on and on for a bit, and I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about where I needed to be. And then he said something. He said, "Listen," he said, "Mister, if you just have anything, I will give you a Louisiana hug." And I was surprised that my first response was, "Never mind, I'm rolling up my window and I'm leaving." But instead, I got out of the car and I walked around and I said, "How good is a Louisiana hug?" And he was surprised. And he then smiled and just reached out and gave me this amazing hug. And I said, "Well, I got $10. And I gave him the $10, and I said, "You know what, but I wish I could give you more because that was priceless." And we visited a little bit longer, and we gave each other a second hug, and I got in the car and I drove on past. We have so many interruptions in our lives. And every moment seems more, in a way, an interruption than an opportunity. And I think sometimes if we think about this whole idea of incarnation, this idea of a stable coming into this crazy, chaotic world, metaphor, story, mythological, whatever, this idea that in the midst, two of the Gospels describe this birth that's broken into this kind of chaotic world. And I think perhaps maybe our own lives are given that opportunity to be like a house, to be like a host or hostess, that every moment is in fact an opportunity to open as opposed to move on. And it's challenging because I think a lot of us are very much like George Bailey. And maybe not at this point in our lives, and maybe so. Because we realize that bag that George Bailey is about to receive from Mr. Gower at that point in the story, this familiar picture that's in your bulletin. When I saw that picture, I remembered that scene, but it wasn't the first image that came to mind. The first image that came to mind was, it's this big. This fish I'm going to catch. This fish that I did catch. And I think of George Bailey and how he's saying to Mr. Gower, I got this big dream. I've got this big destiny. I've got this big wish. My life is going to be like this. And that's what's in that bag, is this big fish that he needs to catch, that he's desperate to catch. But also in that bag is everything else up to that point that has interrupted the dream. Mr. Gower himself, who almost poisoned the child, but George, of course, saved the day as a young boy and warned him. And Mr. Gower's own son, who had died in the war, that brought on that distraction that day for him. And George's own father, who had fought to keep this simple little building and loan alive and probably died from a stroke due to the fact that he was constantly struggling and stressed to the big business around him, to Mr. Potter. All those things are in that bag, as well as what he'd hoped he would find. I think of the song we sang, this wonderful line, the hopes and fears of all our years are met in thee tonight. Now, I got to admit, the way I used to think about that, and sometimes I wish I could think about it to even this day, because I used to think about that song as simply meaning it's up to you. It's up to you, Jesus. It's up to you, little baby. It's up to you, God, now in our midst. All the fears, all the disappointments, and the injustice, and the guilt, and this world is out of control. So it's all up to you. That's why you're here, right? That's why you're into our world, to save the world, to save me. I want it all off my plate. I don't want to see it anymore. I don't want to stop at the stop sign. But I think to myself about this idea in which George suddenly comes to this realization. He's distracted and befriended by an angel. All of his life has come crashing down. But then Clarence comes into the picture. I wonder sometimes how many distractions are in fact Clarence. How many of those opportunities that we think of as just another interruption are in fact an invitation. And he begins to see with Clarence's help that all of his wishful thinking, all of his dreams, all of his disappointments, while they're all in that bag, so is all of the difference he's made. Clarence witnesses to George's life the difference his life has made to others' lives. So I want to think with you about this one last thought. How many of those big fish have gotten away in your life? How many of those dreams and destinies have just kind of slipped? The disappointments. I don't know for you, but for me, there's certainly the family members that won't be at our Christmas gathering this week. Some of whom we've had differences of opinion, perhaps. Some of whom have passed on. They're all going to be under that tree. The things that didn't quite get done, the dreams that didn't quite get met, they're under that tree. But it seems to me that what's offered in the incarnation is this amazing idea that the one in whom we move and live and have our every moment's existence is constantly breaking forth in the midst of these interruptions, like Clarence's, opportunities to see God at every turn. And that when we meet the one who loves and invites us in all of these moments to open the door, to bring in the uninvited guest, the shame, the guilt, the disappointment, as well as the hopes and the dreams, to bring them all in. That when we do that, it gets a little murky. But the invitation is to dive a little deeper. And not run from life, perhaps as George, perhaps, in fact, to dive in. More deeply, more honestly, more authentically, to simply be open. In spite of the discomfort, Lord knows all the opportunities we have to encounter, in spite of the discomfort, to simply be present. And that what happens when we are in fact present, what I want to suggest is that in fact, when we're present, when we're open, we are reminded that these moments that we dismiss sometimes, or that we turn from sometimes, are pregnant with possibility. And in the end, by diving in a little bit deeper, we discover the big fish isn't out there. We are the big fish. Amen.